My name's Quynh, and I am a professional writer. I am a writer for hire. I don't do anything journalistic. People hire me to give words to what they want to say, to their stories. It's really strange because I live in this bubble of writing and storytelling. And so for me, storytelling is everywhere. It's my filter in the world, and so everywhere I go, I see it. I look at someone's face and I see a story. Sometimes I'm wrong about that story, but I want to be wrong because at least I wouldn't say it's an assumption, at least I had a curiosity in the first place. And that's really important to me, to have a curiosity. And at that point, you can have a conversation, okay? So stories are everywhere to me, but I don't know that that is the case in the world so much. I started doing this probably in 2005. And in 2005, I was just writing for people, a lot of architects, a lot of designers. And I wrote their stories because they had a hard time doing it. And this is a thing when you are focused and committed to something you're really doing. You know, you can't have the capacity everywhere to create visually, to write, to express. It's just, it's really, really difficult. So, I mean, this is why I have a job. That's good, right? Right now, what I have done for the past 15 years, did I count that right? Okay, maybe 17 years. What I've done for the past 17 years has come to be called brand storytelling. Back when I did it, I was just writing someone's story. I was just writing something for someone. But brand narratives and brand storytelling is now a branded profession. Okay? And it's a really important one. Big companies have stories. Nike has a story. Airbnb has a story. Can any of you think of other big brands that have these stories that really connect that brand, that product to their user, their audience? Can you think of anyone over Zoom? It's okay. Keep it in your heads. I don't work for those big people. I work for the little people.
So we got some answers there.
Oh my gosh, definitely Patagonia. Great, fantastic. Absolutely, you got it, right? Easy, easy. Okay, I work for like Michael something. I work for small firms and small practices that don't have their own in-house. Okay. There's some really great things about working for smaller practices. Okay. The story isn't there. They don't quite have the story. So they're still forming, and that's really exciting. It's exciting because you get to explore this. I get to explore it with them. I will tell you that I work with architects, I work with designers, artists, I work with entrepreneurs of all different sorts. I worked with developers, realtors, big real estate firms, European real estate firms. I work with party designers who do big projects for like royal families and things. Okay, I'm gonna get into a little bit of that later on, but I will tell you something about working with these smaller firms and working with brands that aren't fully established. It takes a while. It takes a while for a practice to get to a place where they can say, this is who we think we are. Okay? I mean, Nike, Patagonia, Gucci didn't start off day one with, we're Gucci, right? Like, they didn't start off that way. So I work with these smaller firms, and I really like that. I like it because there's nothing already established. I get to work with these people on a very personal basis, and we collaborate, okay? And for me, collaboration is everything. I do not write on my own, okay? It is always a collaborative process. And there's something really lovely about that. I never feel like what I produce is Quinn's product. There's something about having a conversation with someone about what they're doing creatively that helps them generate their own ideas about their practice that they don't think about in words, that I'm asking them to because I ask them the question, the difficult questions. Internally, for myself, I call it an extraction process. Okay, like teeth extraction, it's painful. I get it. But I ask them the hard questions and they have to think about it because they don't have an established brand. And that's just an exciting time for a practice to get to a place where they can start formulating their ideas and putting it out into the world. Okay. I would say realistically 100%, but to be conservative, I'll say 99%. 99% of my clients come to me saying, we want you to tell this story about us. I'm like, okay. So I talk to them, they tell me, they give me some writing that they've done, someone that, you know, in their office has done something, they'll give me bits and pieces here and there, and they'll talk to me about it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go from there, and I start asking questions. And I ask more questions, and then I ask more questions, and then I ask questions they can't answer. And then they go back and they think about it, and they turn back to me. And the story we come up has nothing to do with how they want me to, how they originally wanted me to write about them. What is that discrepancy? Okay. So one of the reasons what I wanted to do up here today was tell you some stories about what I've experienced in my working world, okay, as a writer for creatives. Everyone has this idea of how they want to be perceived. Like, I want to be perceived as someone who creates beautiful things. Very, very common. I want to be perceived as an innovator. Okay. They want to be perceived as award-winning practices, as elegant. They want to be perceived as groundbreaking. Very similar to innovative, right? I hear a lot of this. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring that people want to be in this territory of burgeoning on new things. Well, once I start working and I start asking questions like, one of the first questions I always ask is, why are you ready to talk about yourself? You're at this point, why are you ready? Okay. A lot of times it's like they're ready to be out in the world. Great, they've had some good projects under their belt that have gotten some recognition. So they come to me like, we're ready, okay? Another question I ask them is, how do you want to be perceived? And they think that when they tell me what it is that I should write, they just want me to like pretty up the language, okay? For me, that's not what I really do. I don't ever pretty up language. I want to make sure it's accurate. And I want to make sure it hits the mark about who people are, what they do, and why they do it. So when I ask them how they want to be perceived, a lot of times they're like, well, how is that different from what we told you before about what we want written about us? I'm like, okay, well, how you want to be perceived and what you actually do and what your practice is about are two different things. How you want to be perceived, a lot of times, is about it's a reflection of a cultural standard. It's a reflection of something very common. We all want to be liked. I might have said this before. We all want to be perceived as confident, legitimate. very standard things. That is basically the baseline of where I start. There's nothing unique about that. Why would you want me to tell a story about you that makes you sound like everybody else? Is that the story you want out there? Ultimately, I'm not that direct about it, but the answer is no. So what's my job? My job is to find what's unique about that practice. So I have a big job for me, and I don't take it lightly, because I'm telling someone's story. They're putting themselves in my hands, and to me, that's a big weight and responsibility. So, how do you find something unique about a practice? Honestly, for me, first of all, I'm intensely curious as a human being. I'm intensely curious about people. I'm intensely curious about how things work. And I'm intensely curious about the things I don't know. So when people tell me things that they know, that I know too, because they're common, like, I want to be recognized. Okay, I get it. You're a practice that needs to make money, of course you want to be recognized. So I listen to the things that people are not saying. And that's where I ask the questions. That's where we find unique things about people. That's where I find unique things about their story. Okay. So, I'm going to give you an example. I met an artist. I was going to read her bio too, which I wrote, but I'll try to summarize it. As best I can, even though the written language is, like, in my opinion, quite nice. Well done, all that. Good grammar, ebbs and flows beautifully. Good sentence structure, varied sentence structure. Well, that's not what this is about. I'm proud of that one. Okay, so this artist came to me and she said, you know what, I was an illustrator for a very long time. And for the last 5 years, I've stopped illustrating and I started doing abstract paintings. And I have a new sort of take on life, a new identity, and a new practice now in my art. And I'd like to have a different profile and bio for it. Can you help me? I said, sure. And I like her, and she was referred to me by another client that I like and trust quite a bit. So we started talking, and I said, well, I looked over all of her work. And when I said before that this is like a big responsibility, I survey the work from beginning to end. I have looked at thousands and thousands of photos of buildings, of designs, of artwork to make sure I get a scope of this person's life. Okay? So it's a lot of work that I'm happy to do. But that's the thing about being curious about someone's story. You need to know the insides and outs of it. Okay. So I looked at her work. I looked at her early illustrations when she was in her 20s. I think she worked for Johnson & Johnson. She worked for major firms. And I said, okay, I've seen your illustrations. What led you to do illustration? She's like, I love art. I said, why illustration? There's so many different avenues for art. She said it was safe. It was a safe way to make money. It was responsible. I could make money. It could be a steady income. Art was unpredictable. She got married, had kids, and they're all grown. She got a divorce, has tons of money now in her bank. She's like, I don't need the money, I don't need the security, I already have it. I'm like, is that why? Long story short, that's how come she went into abstract painting. Okay? And I said, so you needed the financial security to feel safe for you to do something that was totally risky. Do you see how that's a different story? It's a different story than, oh, I decided to have a career change. It gets deeper. Here's the story. I looked through all of her abstract work and I said, you have very similar colors in all of these. I put all of her work out and we went through them because it's a part of my job, and this is where creativity is. I don't do visual art, but I have an eye for it. My dad was a painter, and so I grew up with a lot of visual art around. So I looked at her work, and I was like, there's a color pattern here. Do you see it? And then I pointed it out to her. And she said, no, I've never seen that. I just paint. Okay. And then we laid them out. We did swatches and laid them out. And I said, where do these colors come from? Again, I'm simplifying and summarizing some of this for you. And she said, oh my gosh, they're colors from these books that I used to read when I was a kid. They're the exact same colors. So we found the books. We're like, what is up with these books? These books were old tales, old cautionary tales of if you didn't follow the rules, bad things would happen to you. If you didn't follow the rules, bad things would happen to you in life. These were the exact same colors. I'm not saying like it was 90%. It was 100%. The exact same colors. And they came through when she sort of opened herself up to risk and did what she felt. How do we write that story? Well, how we write that story is, again, I'm summarizing. She has done the safe thing her entire life. Made money, did illustration, super steady job, had kids, got married. Everything was just standard, safe. This is securing my life. When she didn't need it anymore, she did exactly what she wanted. And this is the shift. That's the story. Right? It's not like I'm just after a story. Like these people matter to me. My clients matter to me. It is her story. And I would tell you most of the time, these stories are as surprising to them as they are to me. Well, I actually walk in not knowing what's going to happen. So they're somewhat surprising to me. They're tremendously surprising to my clients. A lot of times creatives create. They don't think about necessarily. They can. There are some creatives who have a very cerebral process. Frank Gehry, for one, has a very cerebral process. Sometimes it's just an expression of what you're doing through your hands, through your eyes, but it's not this, everything has to be thought out and planned, okay? So, and then someone, when you want something written about yourself, and then someone asks you to think about it, and that's what happens. That's one story. Okay. And I happen to love that story because she found something for herself. That words, collaboration, connection, someone who listened to her, someone who asked her the right questions, could help her tell that story. And that's what I feel like I do. I help people tell the story because I have some skills. Okay, I have some skills in this area. Okay. 1 second. So I would say, during the pandemic, a lot of us had questions about what are we doing, what are our lives like, should we plant something, should we bake something, or, I like lots of questions. Am I going to be remote working, not see anyone for the rest of my life? What's going on? Am I just going to keep distance from people all the time? So my question at that time, when I was writing, see, I'm an extrovert. Like, I'm a hardcore, extreme extrovert. And living in Los Angeles, for me, I love going out. I love seeing people. Being stuck in my apartment, oh my God, it was a killer. Like, it was soul crushing. I am fine on my own. I like being, but not that much, because the exchange of ideas with other human beings. I said I'm a listener and I'm curious. I can't just be curious about myself. It gets boring. So I felt so terrible. So honestly, I was struggling quite a bit. I was still working because with what I do, I can work remotely quite well. But I struggled quite a bit because I'm like, God, do I want to do this writing thing anymore? It's just really hard. Like to be honest with you, I had a really hard time with it. And I thought about moving in a different direction and having a different career. And I'm also a teacher, so I was thinking of like moving just into teaching and like quitting this writing thing, which was really, really hard. And I honestly, I had to ask myself, why is this so hard? Why is it getting so hard for me? Is it just because I don't see people in person? A little bit. But you know what? It was a bigger question of why it was hard for me. I struggled with it because of the nature of how I work. It's how I like to work, but how I like to work also makes my job very hard. I walk into every single new client situation with the premise that I don't know anything. Can you imagine? Sometimes I have 4 or 5 clients at a time. I walk into each meeting with a completely blank slate that I don't know anything. Do you know how hard that is? It's incredibly painful when you add it up and you can't connect with people. Like you can't read people because you can't be there face to face with them. At least when I walk into a room with people, someone's smiling, I'm like, oh, this is nice. I have some information. On Zoom, I have no information. Okay? So I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore because it's so hard. The thing about walking into a scenario where you don't know what's going on, and you have 4 or 5 of those scenarios, in a time when we're culturally in an anxious place, it made it worse for me. And then I had a few conversations with good friends, and then I tried to ground myself a little bit with this because I've been doing this for so long. Think about it, even though I've been doing it for so long, I will tell you, if you try to find unique stories about every single one of your clients, no matter how long you do something, it is always different. And that's, again, a pretty scary place. It is always different. I never want to peg my clients into walking in, you're a woman, you're a man, this is what story I'm going to tell. Never. Always walking in empty-handed. It's pretty scary. Okay. I feel like I might have belabored that point. A friend of mine said to me, she said, actually 2 different friends. One said to me, you know what we call that in, she's a UX designer. She said, you know what we call that? We call that discovery. We call it a discovery phase. So you just sit there and you ask a bunch of questions. However, a lot of UX teams, they have teams working on this. You're just one person. I work by myself. So all this swirling, new, unknown information, I'm the only one sitting there talking to myself about it, asking the questions of my clients. I don't have a team. I don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. I have my clients, but they're the ones I have to decipher. Okay? So she said, I think you should build in this grace period for yourself where you're okay not knowing. You do that generally, but it's getting hard for you for some reason. And I think it was the pandemic stuff, right? So you should just build in and be easy on yourself that you don't know stuff, because you used to be fine with not knowing stuff. I was like, oh man, I think she's right. I'm like, it's okay that I don't know. This is my job to not know stuff. Like, that's kind of weird. My job is to not know stuff. Kind of, someone wants that job, right? Someone would want that job and think it's easy. I want that job and it's really hard. Okay. I said, okay, it was a really good reminder for me to have this period where I don't know anything, and that's totally fine. That's what I signed up for. I've already talked about being able to ask questions when you don't know something. If you don't know something, and it is your job to ask the right questions, man, seeing a new client, that's your territory, right? Ask away, ask anything. Nothing seems stupid at that point because total blank slate. Great. I reminded myself of that. You get to ask anything you want, any which way you want. You're a person who's curious. This is your platform. Fantastic. The other thing that is to a client's advantage, if I don't know anything, I am a third party. I am not towing their party line. I will question everything that they say to me. Oh, we got this project, it was very well received, look at this article, and I read the articles and I'm like, oh, this is a crap criticism of your, this is a crap analysis of your project. Whatever, let's look at your project. And you know what, I'm like, sure, okay, I'll take some things, but not everything. My clients get a third party looking at their work to say, and I'm a pretty discerning person, and I've done this for many years, so I don't have a design degree, I don't have an architecture degree, but I'm a pretty discerning person. And so they get a perspective, like my client who, when I looked at her paintings, I saw the same color palette, mixed up a little bit differently here and there, but very much, she's like, I had no idea. You have someone else looking at your work. You have someone else looking at you from a third-party perspective. That is such an advantage. It's an advantage when, even if when you're established and someone says, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this about your practice? Okay. That's reaffirming to me. Okay? I do the difficult work. I sit in a very difficult place, and I'm sweating through it. But I see the value in it. Okay. Something that, I'm sorry, so another friend of mine that I spoke to, and she said, hey Quynh, you're someone, as long as I've known you, you always want a variety of things in life, and you're always challenging yourself, and that person never has it easy. And like, God, what did I do to my life? Like, why did I sign up for this? Okay, sorry, I was gonna say that word. Why did I sign up for this? Why did I sign up to always have like some difficult scenario? Whatever, that's a bigger question, but that's what I signed up for. Okay, so, and there's a result about it that I really like. The collaborations are fantastic. The ideas that we come up with are fantastic. The connection that I have with people is phenomenal. I have to tell you, like maybe 75% of my clients that I have never met before within like weeks will be like, oh my gosh, I never knew this about myself. Tears, tears. And I'm like, sorry. Okay. You don't disconnect after tears. Yeah. So there's some really beautiful things that come out from this. And I'm a people person. I'm an extrovert, so these things matter to me. Connection to people really matter to me. So I'm in the right job, honestly. Okay. The thing that also grounded me when I was like in this upheaval of like, I should quit what I do, and this is so hard, is process. I went back to my process. Not to say that the process hasn't changed, but I went back to the basics of my process. One, I sit down, I make eye contact with someone. And I look at them, and I say, tell me what you like about your practice. It's the conversation. I interview. I do a lot of competitive research. I'll look at their competitors, what their competitors are saying. I'll look at the common denominator of what their competitors are saying. And I have them write everything. I write with them and I ask them questions that do everything but the common denominator. It's almost like the common denominator gets a little line, because we can do that too. I don't care about that. I really want my clients to shine. And I pride myself, honestly, if there's like a point of pride, on being able to find that point. It's important to them, it's important to me. And in some ways, I kind of drink that Kool-Aid. But I'm on their side, I kind of have to. You know, you hire me to be on your side. Even if I say things that they don't agree with, even if I say things that are difficult and controversial, they always know I am on their side. It's crucial to a client relationship. I have a client right now that I'm doing, they are a global real estate company. They sell yachts and castles and things. And when I first saw what they were doing, I'm like, I don't think I do this, you know? I don't think I like work with companies that sell yachts. This is like way too big for me. And once I started talking to the client, just a person like me, nothing more. I said, okay, we can work together. Right? I forgot where I was going with this. So we're redoing their website. It's not a full rebrand, but we're redoing their website because they want it more personable. They're right now at a stage in their lives where they make so much money, they want more connection and personality versus like grandioseness. I'm like, okay, well, if you have a yacht on your, you know, as a part of your sales here, sure, we'll be more personable so that everyone can have a yacht, right? This client hates everybody. He hates the graphic designer, and she's doing her job because I work with her. He hates, I don't know, he hates a lot of people. He doesn't hate me. And I'm like, oh, they're special. You know why? Because I have the job where I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that painting in the back of your Zoom. He's in New York, right? I love that painting. Is that a Kandinsky? He's like, oh yeah. We talked about Kandinsky. He was telling me about, gosh, what is that? Like marathons. And he's like traveling all around the world. And I love to travel. We're talking about India. We're talking about all these things. And I'm going to tell you, I'm billing for these hours. Okay? You know why? Because even though we're not talking about his website, we're not talking about his brand, building a connection to allow someone to talk about these things is a part of the job. Yeah, we talked about his cooking. He talks to me about everything. He even talks to me about design changes. I'm like, I'm not the designer. He's like, can you just talk to her? I don't really like her. I'm like, okay, fine. But that's the thing. I was talking earlier about, to a workshop here, about tricks of the trade. So I'm a teacher. I'm talking mostly about being a writer tonight, but I'm also a teacher. So I'm a teacher and I'm a writer. The trick of the trade for both is the same. Be likable. And I say that because you're like, wow, so you're basically making being likable a trick. Like you're tricking people to liking you. You've like developed some sort of persona. I've developed some sort of persona to be liked so that I can, yeah, sure, why not, right? The thing is, there's no trick in that I actually really like people. I genuinely care about people. I genuinely like them. I'm genuinely curious. Does it help me with the things that I do? Absolutely. It helps when I have to say things people don't want to hear because they trust me. It's not about being likable. It's about being real and authentic. And maybe I'll change in a couple years, because we're always changing. I feel like I'm a pretty authentic person, and when I authentically reach out and connect with people, I really mean it. But then again, that's probably why I do what I do. I don't have this personality so that, I didn't develop this personality because it's necessary for my job. I came into these jobs because this is my personality. There's a difference. So, I get a lot. I mean, I get so much done with this person, with this difficult person, and sometimes I have difficult clients. 50% of the time, we don't talk about the work. That's a part of the work, and that's the part I really enjoy too. So, I want to say something about writing. So, I'm a writer. I don't always write well. Most of the time, I don't. I write well when it matters. My emails, terrible. Like, absolutely terrible. I repeat things. Oh my God. I wrote something to someone the other day, and I was so overwhelmed by how patient she was. I started the email off saying, I'm so appreciative of your patience, blah, 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 said we're gonna meet this time. I ended the conversation with, I'm so appreciative for your patience. And I didn't see that, I didn't notice it, I just sent the email. When she responded to me, I was like, such a dumb, I just wrote this twice. And I don't pay attention. People have an idea about writers. It's glamorous. Dude, I live in a hole, like I'm just by myself all the time when I say I live in a hole. I live in a very nice place, but I'm just by myself all the time. Writing, for the most part, when I sit down and do the writing, I am alone. Okay? It is not a glamorous job. What else do people think about writers? Articulate, smart. I don't know. What else? What do people think about writers?
Perfect grammar all the time.
Oh my God, that's the word. Totally. Perfect grammar all the time. Okay. I'm a terrible typer. I type 50 words a minute, terribly. Everything's always wrong. I blame autocorrect, and I hope that people accept that. But that's, my grammar is terrible. I can't text to save my life. But I get it right when it matters. And I don't correct people. I never correct people. I actually really hate that. What I wanted to say about language is alive and it evolves. There are words now like YouTube that weren't around 15 years ago. There's so many words that weren't around 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And they were the same 20 years before that. A lot of words weren't around. These words also represent concepts that weren't around. Language is alive and it evolves like culture. So I play with language quite a lot. I don't always believe in exact grammar. I know my grammar, but I don't, I know it when it matters. I don't think about it when I'm writing an email. And there's something lovely about how language evolves like that. When you have a conversation with someone, do you expect someone to speak to you in complete sentences? Conversational English, written English, texting English, social media English, totally different things. So don't worry about not getting writing a certain way. It doesn't have to be any way. When that gets worked on is revision. I don't revise my emails, but I revise everything that I put out into the world for a client. That's the other thing about writing. My process, I mentioned it before, is first it's interviewing the clients and talking to them. My first draft of something is words. I just have a list of maybe 50 words. That's it. I don't even think of complete sentences. It's just smattering of words. the words evolve. I write a bunch of junk, and I dump it. There's something important when you're writing. It's called, it's just organization. How you organize what you're going to say. And you can't get organization until you get the information. And until you get organized, you're going to think everything sounds like crap, or is crap, and it is, and that's fine. It's not for the stage that you're in, okay? So I go back to my process, and I rely on that to carry me through when I'm having a really hard time. And if you're doing something right, if you're doing something difficult, and you're doing something right in that difficulty, you're always going to have a hard time. You're always going to have the moment when you want to run out the door and not do this anymore. Okay? And at times you can get used to it. But that's the hump that you get over when you get it. And when I get it, I feel good. But I also know who else feels good is my client, and I'm doing something really worthy for them. Okay. Back to language. Really, the scary thing about all those rules, they're nothing. Don't worry about it. That's what revision is for. I can tell you, one of my favorite jobs in terms of teaching is I teach writing to, I don't do it very much, and I've done it less and less, but I teach writing to 10th, 11th graders who are working on their college essays. And I don't necessarily teach them how to write the college essay. I teach them how to write. Those will have 30 revisions. 30. It's a lot of revising. I can tell you, super simple. You want to make anything you write better, just read it once for redundancy. That's it. That is the simplest thing you can do to clean it up. Where do you have the same words? Where are you repeating the same ideas? That's it. Just clean that up. It'll be at least 10 to 20% better. Revision, revision, revision. Who cares about the initial writing? That's all gonna wait. Okay? I worked with a student. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the teacher part as well. I worked with a student on his college essay. And the thing about working, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna stretch a little and say this. We're all students, right? You're a student, everyone's a student somewhere. At some point in your life, you're a student of something, okay? The students that I work with when I do these essays, they're one of the coolest things I've ever done. It's about an 8-month process for me to work with students. I don't sign a contract for less than 8 months. Sometimes it's more. And I get parents who are like, that's a long time. I'm like, that's my role. I meet them every week, 8 months. Every week, sometimes every other week, but generally. I'm like, that's a lot. That's it, that's my role. It's okay if you're not into it, I get it. That's a big commitment. Every single one, and I say every single one of my students go to college being the best writers in their classes. I had a student send me an essay that he had written. Is his name Ryan Tricarton? Do you guys know the architect, the designer Ryan Tricarton? He wrote an essay on him in his first year design class. His teacher gave it back to him and said, this is a grad school. It's intense. It's a really intense process. And every single student, it's very doable, but it's hard for a while. It's something I'm really, really proud of, because to enter college knowing how to write, you don't just know how to write. You know the thinking that you have to do to produce good writing. You can't be a good writer if you're not Otherwise, you get someone who'll read it and say, oh, that's crap. It's beautiful language, but it doesn't say anything. Okay. You cannot have good writing if you are not going to commit to the thinking behind it. I have a client who's a designer and architect. She, I told her I would talk about her tonight, so this is okay. She's one of the co-founders of the Pussy Hat Project. Do you guys know about the Pussy Hat Project? Those pink hats, right? Inauguration day, 2020. Okay. She was a designer who was incapacitated because she was in an accident. So she couldn't go to the Women's March on January 20th, 2020. So she said, what can I do to participate? What happened was in 2019, there was a lot of momentum being built up for potentially Hillary Clinton being nominated or becoming president, right? 2020? 2016. I'm so sorry. Okay. 2016. I knew that was wrong. Thank you. 2016. There was a lot of momentum behind that. So when Donald Trump won the election, it was a big letdown for many people. Not for everyone, just a big letdown for many people. And I think there was a lot of outrage amongst women. She was outraged. And she said, what can I do? And at this point, she'd had an injury and she knew she couldn't. The march was starting to be planned the day maybe a couple days after he was elected. She said, I can't go, but how do I contribute? How do I participate? She put on her design hat. Instead of designing a product or a building, she designed a movement using her design skills. How do I get an effective visual across at the Women's March in, was it November, December, like what is that, 2.5 months? December, oh yeah, about 2.5 months. How do I get an effective visual across to recognize the outrage of women that a misogynist was elected? In her mind, a misogynist, in many, was elected. So she, along with a few other people, designed the Pussy Hat. Okay, all it is it's 2 rectangles sewn together. And if you squish it, it becomes a hat, and it looks like little cat ears. Hence, pussy hat, pussy cat, right? And the pink has another connotation. I'm not going to get into it, but yeah. Okay. Simple design. Accessible to many. Accessible to people who might not be able to participate like her at the actual march. People with disabilities, people who don't have funds, people who have families to take care of. These were all considerations. What is this? It's thinking of a user. It's design while thinking of users. Simple design. Anyone could do, and you can alter it to your own desires and specifications. People knitted, people just had 2 pieces of fabric and just sewed it up by hand. People who didn't, low skills, you could have low skills or high skills. You could alter it to however it is that was accommodating to your own skill level and your own commitment to it. And people were encouraged to make them for others because they were so easy. You know how many knitters knit those hats? Tons. If you look at photos, and I probably should have pulled one up for you, but if you look at photos of how many pink hats were in DC, on the 20th of January, it's a sea of them. If you look at the news coverage of how many people in the world, not just in America, in their homes, in their cities, wearing pink hats, it's incredible. She used design thinking. She used a design process to understand accessibility for potential users, ease for potential users, for this audience, a mode of participation that was very inclusive. For her in particular, she's like, I have a disability. How did her disability help her to empathize with other people who could not participate by being there in person? And lastly, it was a visual statement. She's a designer. It was a visual statement. Do you see what the power of design can do? And I'm saying this is a design story, but she's one of my clients, right? And I got to write that story, right? And I worked with her to write that story. I mean, the story was there. It's just, it took nuance and language to have all the things that folded into why it was such a powerful movement. And it gave her some language. So she was able to talk about it too. When she went to talk to people, she used language that we had worked on together so that she felt comfortable and secure about how things unfolded. It's a process of thinking that leads to this process of writing. And they reinforce one another. Because once you write something with clarity and personal, you own that. It's so much easier to tell that story once you've written it. The clarity's there. I gave an example tonight earlier in the workshop. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a designer, and she said, well, you know, Quynh, Amazon removed, and I don't know if this is like an urban legend, if it's actually true. This is just our conversation. I took what she was saying. Amazon removed all of bullet points in their meetings and PowerPoints because they wanted everyone to write paragraphs to explain what they had to explain in the meeting. Their meetings, counterintuitively, were shorter because the people who ran them knew what they were talking about, knew how to talk about it, instead of referring to a bullet point that someone else had to read. They knew how to talk about something that they were supposed to know how to talk about. So there's power in language in how you think. But the thinking is also behind what you write. Okay? It's a reinforcing of each other. And I admit, people tell me I do sound articulate and clear and that I sound like I know what I'm talking about. That's because I write a lot. I would not sound like this if I didn't write a lot. I have some language skills, and I think a lot about what I'm going to write. I mean, I prepared tonight. I would not sound like this if I had not prepared. I don't know how to sound, actually, but I hope it's okay. So, does anyone have any questions? Any thoughts? I'm kind of open. Anything like sounded off? Anything you have questions about with the projects or anything? Yeah. So I have a little reputation. That if you just want to throw something, like there are people who just want to give someone something and say, okay, can you do this? That's not me. Like I have a little reputation for being very collaborative. So clients who just want to give a writer something and then leave them alone, I can't tell that story because I don't know what the story is. That's language that could mean 10 different ways depending on how someone reads it, how I read it. It's a really good question. Most of the time, my clients get filtered quite a bit. They get weeded out because of referrals and even having a conversation with me. You know that you're not going to get someone who will, like follow some generic branding or something, or follow some generic story. I would say half of my clients are referrals because they know how I work. They've seen my work from friends and so forth. The other half, I have conversations with them. And when you have a conversation with me, you know it's not going to be like You know what you're getting. Great question. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had clients that haven't worked out. So I've had clients that haven't worked out. Not very many, to be honest with you, but yeah. Thank you. I'll tell you something about, I might have alluded to it before. Generic stories are so easy. They're so easy to spot. You don't want to read them, right? If you read generic narratives about something, they're out there and everywhere. And when someone says, "Oh, I want you to tell this story about me," they're hearing it from a generic culture. And I'm like, wow, you know your way like more than this. Honestly, that's where some trust is built. When someone sees that I see more than that. I see more than what they're giving me. And I'm not making it up. It's my job to see these things. And I want to see these things. I'm built to see these things too. It's just the nature of who I am. And I've cultivated it too. I mean, yeah. Generic stories, so forgettable. You don't want to sound like that. No one wants to sound like that. Right? So, like, my mission in the world. Like, find your unique story. Find where we're all sitting in the same room, experiencing supposedly the same thing, where you heard something different. Because I bet you, if I asked all of you what you heard today, all of you would have picked up on different things. But it wouldn't be something we say out loud, because you might just hear what someone else is saying. Write it down what you heard. I'm pretty sure you all connected with different things about what I said. And some of you might be like, I don't connect with that person at all. And that's okay. I have a teaching story. I don't know, is a teaching story okay? Okay. There was one period in my life that I thought was perfect. I was like, God, life can't be more perfect than this. Of course it wasn't, but in my head it was. I was running a residency for student teachers. Like I teach student teachers. So I was running a residency for them. And I teach them pedagogy, I teach them how to do a curriculum, I teach them how to work in the classroom, I teach them how to manage a classroom. I have a couple stories about this actually that I love. Okay. Probably just something I love, but these student teachers, I teach them, I taught this residence, I've run this residency a couple times. They ask me all the time, what is the most important thing that you can teach us? If you had to teach us just 2 things that we could learn to become better teachers, what would it be? The first thing I tell them, forget everything you were ever taught about teaching. Every single one of you went through school. You learned about teaching because of how you were taught. You learned that someone talks to you. You learned that there are projects that you do. We all have very, very similar backgrounds in terms of how we were taught. If you want to be a good teacher, you need to forget how you were taught and develop your own teaching. Everything from writing, from teaching, it comes back to your own voice. You have to bring yourself into your classroom. You have to bring yourself into a dynamic with your clients, into a dynamic with an audience, into a dynamic with the person you are designing for. You have to put yourself into that picture as well. It's a dynamic relationship. Okay? So I tell them, you have to forget how you were taught because you were modeled, this is what a teacher does. And you have to develop yourself in that classroom. You have to let your personality come through. That's a hard thing. Because it's a hard thing to let your personality come through in life. And now I'm telling you, as your profession, this is what you need to do. Okay? And to me, that's relatable because it's in writing, in designing, in teaching. You have to show up with the best version best, I don't mean like, oh, this is the life I'm living. I'm living the current version of you, and that is the best version of you. Okay? You have to show up as that person. Flawed, perfect, everything. Okay? I had a student who came to me, always late, handed in her, I get lesson plans every single day. They were late all the time. And every time I saw them, and I observed her classrooms, and I was like, oh my God. All right. She, lovely person, lovely student. I called her into I had a meeting with her in my office. I called her in my office, say, hey, let's come and talk. She stood by the door, couldn't even come in. And I said, I can't fire you. Like, you're in a teaching program. I can't fire you. I could yell at you, but I'm not a yeller by nature. I'm not going to yell at you. Nothing's going to happen to you. Just walk through the door and sit down. That's it. Nothing's going to happen to you. She's like, you're not going to get mad at me. I said, I'm not mad at you now. It's fine. And when I say that this is one of those times in my life where I thought I was perfect, so wrong. This is why. It's because I had this one moment when my clarity was so strong. My clarity was so strong because I've been her. I've been totally scared to approach someone of authority because I thought I did something wrong that was unforgivable. I thought I did something I could not return from. It wasn't a big deal in life, really. But it feels like you can't return from it. So she sat down, and I said, do you know why I asked you here? Shivers, like totally scared. Pretty approachable person. For her to be scared of me, it tells you like she's got her own anxieties about something that's going on. And this is the perfect moment. This is one of those moments where I'm like, where did that come from? Because you've never been like that since, and you weren't like that before, Quynh. I don't know where this came from. I said to her, you never have to give me any lesson plan that is perfect. You are a student learning. Your contract with me is just to turn it in on time. It can even be blank. I don't care. Your contract with me is just to turn it in on time. If it is perfect, then you're not giving me a chance to do my job to help you make it better. And afterward, who was that talking? Like, where did that come from? Right? And this is why I said I had this little perfect one. Oh my gosh, I wish I could be like that all the time. But not the case. And that's the thing. You don't have to show up with what you think people are expecting of you. You just have to show up. And I sat there with her, and she was like, oh my God, you're the best friend I've ever had. And I'm like, I'm not your friend. And then I had to get real. He's like, I'm your teacher. I'm very warm and very friendly, but the only reason I can say this to you and have you listen to me is because I am not your friend. And that is a good thing. Boundaries, I'm like, again, perfect, right? What the hell? I don't know who that person was. She hasn't come back. I had good boundaries. I was compassionate. I'm like, geez, that's pretty good. Okay, long time ago. So, life, design, processes are about iterations. It's all an iteration. My perfect moment, an iteration. It's gone, right? Comes and goes. I can't remember that other thing about teaching. So there, sorry. Just I give you one thing. I hope that's okay. But any thoughts? You don't have to have questions. Just thoughts. I worked with event party designer. But they just weren't event party designers. They were like big time party designers. They designed weddings for the royal families, the Saudi royal families, like almost exclusively. And they asked me to do some case studies for some of their projects. And they sent over to me a bunch of the photos, the specs. They hired quite a lot of really big names to do like production stuff and to do the design of very elaborate events. And she gave it to me. She's like, "These are the things we want you to write." And they're kind of hard-nosed. They're like really, like, "This is what we want you to write. This is how we want it done." And I looked at it and I was like, okay. I looked over everything and it just, what they said didn't sound right to me. And I was like, well, how am I going to talk to these people? Because they're limiting themselves. And that's what happens when you work within something. This is why you need other people. This is why when you think you have all the answers, you're usually wrong. Okay? You need other people to give you this feedback. They had been working on this project, I think, for like over a year. And they find just for one night of a wedding. Okay? The project had this elaborate, had a dance sequence that was done by the same woman who choreographed The Lion King. And it had this huge, aerial thing, and it had all these, it was amazing. It was crazy and amazing. It was gorgeous. And when I looked at this and they asked me to write this, I was like, "You're writing this as though it were a party. It's not a party. There are art elements here. There's architectural elements here." And so I was like, well, I'm just going to give them my take and see what they think. I wrote back and I said, "Here are the architectural elements. Here are the art elements. Here's how art and architecture come together to create an experience. What you've done here is you created an experience. You didn't give them a party. You created an experience. Let's talk about this as an experience of art and architecture and installation and performance and lighting." And they came back and I said, "We didn't see that." This is why collaboration, having someone else look at your work, talking to people really matters.
Other than the profession of writing, what other profession would you like to attempt?
I'm going to go way out there, and I would say not attempt, realistically, but in a different dimension. I would like to be a mountain rescue climber.
All right.
Why?
Now you have to expand on why.
I really like what I do. It utilizes some qualities and things about me that I've cultivated and that I really like and that are part of who I am. It's very cerebral. It's very emotional. It can be very hard on me. I would love to do something completely physical. Very physical. But also thoughtful. Also strategic in some way. But I would like to, I took one of those 23andMe DNA exams, DNA tests, and it came back and it said, "You're very athletic." I'm like, what are they talking about, right? And I actually am, but if you don't use it, you lose it. Right? So I don't really use it. But when I was younger, I was fairly athletic. And I'm just I think that's a calling in my next life or another parallel dimension somewhere. I love the mountains. I love being in the mountains, but yeah. Okay, a mountain rescue plan.
On the opposite, what career would you least like to attempt or do?
Politician.
Maybe writing for a politician, but not being one.
I actually used to work at the Department of Education as a researcher, and I wrote press releases. I didn't write them all, but I contributed to the writing of press releases for the Secretary of Education when there were administrations that believed in a Secretary of Education. Some don't, you know.
How would you like to be remembered?
I don't know about like remembered on in a public way, but I like to be remembered as someone who was always continuing to be herself, like growing into that and becoming more and more myself until I die. I think so. I'll explain. I have come across clients who haven't had a lot of life experience. And I have to recognize the capacity of my clients too, to be able to delve into certain things. I'm pushy, but I'm thoughtful. I don't push people to where I don't think they can go because it hurts them. And that's not my goal, right? That completely goes against what we're all trying to do. So if I get hired for something and I know it'll cap off, I've asked as many questions and the responses don't go further, that's okay. I'll write to that what it is. It might not be where, see, this is where boundaries are really important, where I told that student, I am warm, I am friendly, I care about you, I care about your growth, but I am not your friend. This is where that boundary comes in, and you have to have good boundaries, otherwise you get too invested. I get too invested in their story, and it'll become something I want, and not something that they are. So it's a boundary thing. It's recognizing those boundaries and knowing that I can only go so far. It's not even go so far. It makes it sound like they're limited. I go where they take me. But I will ask the questions to go further if that's possible. Such a good question. I go get something to eat. I make some food. I bake. I eat potato chips. I'm a little bit of a those food is a little bit of my break. Such a good question because I do get very invested and then I can't see the language. Honestly, I try to be very honest with my clients and I tell them it's a process. It'll take some time because the time is I need a week away from it where I can't see it anymore, where I can't see my own writing anymore. And sometimes there are little tricks that are kind of cool and that all of you can do. You can cut and paste what you've written into an email where it's another format, where everything is moved around. Then you can see it differently. You can change the font size so that there's 10 words on a line versus 15, because everything changes. Once it visually changes, you can see it differently as well, depending on how complicated it is, right? So there are little things like that, or I'll print it out or something. When you see it in different formats, you can actually see it differently, and that's kind of neat. But for the most part, I have to take a really long, big break, especially if I've worked on it a lot, and I'm reading the same things, and my eyes are like, ooh, yeah. Great question. I love Milan Kundera. One of the reasons I like him, he's poetic and political, and easy and not. He mixes it all in, but because it was written in a different language and translated, people don't always like that. There's something I love about translations, because translation is an art in and of itself. And I love Kundera for that. I love F. Scott Fitzgerald. Simple, super simple. Simple language, simple images, so accessible to everyone. Simple, basic human concepts that exist for everyone. Socioeconomic issues, just super basic things, timeless. Writing-wise, the first writer I ever read that I felt like, oh my gosh, this person gets me was Maya Angelou. It was like in 10th grade. No writer had I read before. And I wasn't even a reader. I was a little, oh my gosh, my high school teachers knew this. I was a little bit of a cheater. I did not like to read too much, to be honest with you. So I'm kind of perceptive about things. So I would like skip to the end, and everything in the middle, just when it came out, just made sense to me. It's like, oh, this happened. I'm like, of course it happened, or whatever. And I would just pick through things, like reading a little bit of each. I'm like, and what happened in between? I just logically said, oh, when this happened, and then 2 chapters later when this happened, of course this happened in between. I don't know where that came from, but I kind of just knew that happened in between. But the first person I ever read fully was Maya Angelou. And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen, but man, it's really quite powerful. So, yeah. Oh, I love reading book reviews too. Book review writers, amazing writing. I don't always agree with the reviews or anything, but the writing is amazing.
Do you ever get overwhelmed or confused by the many different stories you hear and write about?
From different people or from one person, I'm not quite sure. Maybe from...
Yeah, from maybe the different clients that you have and getting their, since you have multiple clients.
Yeah, no, I don't. And I don't because I'm a really careful listener, and I connect with my clients so much that I don't forget that story. I don't forget that it came from them. Listening is totally key. And honestly, I have to say, through the pandemic, once it was over, people just wanted to talk all the time. Like, I did a lot of listening because people hadn't had a chance to talk. I was just getting it like a lot. I'm like, oh my gosh, when you're a good listener, everyone just wants to talk to you. Because I don't think anyone had that interaction where they felt heard and listened to. So, yeah. So no, I don't get them confused at all.
In one of our classes, our professor is asking us to come up with keywords for our brand.
Ooh, yeah.
I appreciate you hearing about how you go about putting together designers' works and value into words. But do you have any advice on how we can do this for ourselves?
To brand yourself or to brand your own design? Well, I don't understand. There's a question about to brand themselves as people?
Yeah, well, as a designer.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Yep. A question that I always ask. After someone reads this about you, after someone reads this about your product, how do you want them to feel? What feeling do you want the audience, a user, to be left with after they interact with you, your website, your language, your product, anything that comes from you? What do you want them to feel? I think if you can, it's hard. It's hard to be you and say, well, how do I want to leave people feeling? And then how do I do that? Okay. I would say it's easier to do that when you have a controlled way to write something versus in person. Like someone said to me, well, Quynh, after this conversation, well, for you to do this lecture today, how do you want people to feel? I have some ideas, but I don't know. It's kind of a crapshoot. right? Because I'm actually not used to talking, but in general, I talk to a lot of people. There's like 3 people here, 4 people here, right? So it's a different dynamic. That energy of a lot of people in the room isn't here. So I don't know if it answers your question, but really it's start small. Start with maybe just a friend, a family member, and say, in this conversation, how do I want them feeling after they've left a conversation with me? The other way to look at it is tone. What is the tone that you want? Something you've made, something you've said, a conversation that you've just had with someone. What is the tone that you want left behind?
Can you give an example of that? What you mean by tone?
Yeah. It's very similar to feeling, right? But let's say I just finished a website. I finished doing I did the content strategy for the website. And my question that guided me to do the language was, what are 3 words? What is the tone that you want a user who's just gone through your website? What is the feeling you want the user to have? What is the tone of this website? So some examples are, we want them to leave the site feeling like they're in really good hands. They have a sense of security and trustedness. Trust. The tone, so the website has this tone of trust in the language and in the visuals that integrate with the language to present this. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Has a brand or a person you've invested in time-wise and energy-wise had ended up failing or closing or however, and how does that affect you?
Mm-hmm.
So if you put a lot of work into it.
Yes. Because by the nature, I work with smaller businesses. The largest firm I've ever worked with, maybe like gross, maybe 30, 40 million. That's the largest. There's a lot smaller than that too. So it's not, in the big scheme of things, it's not that big. Okay. Yes, and I don't feel bad about it. Okay, and one of the reasons I don't feel bad about it, because for the time that we worked together, that was pertinent, and it wasn't wasted. Just because something folds does not mean that time was wasted doing it. There was something that they took from that they moved on with. There was something that I took from that I moved on with. So at any given moment in my present being, in all of our present beings, the things that we've done, they're all here. They might not manifest, they're all here. So I don't feel bad about it.
I think that's super pertinent to a lot of us as designers, because a lot of our work we create and continue to create, and either our clients may not be able to take the ideas forward, they may close, or ideas sit on shelves for years. I know, I'm sure you're familiar, our company, we've done a lot of work that for brands that it's all intended in some cases to sit, because it's inspiring something else or moving something forward. And you have to take that, the passion you had for that work, and separate it from what goes beyond that work.
Yeah. And
realize that it is, for its time, it is right for what it is, and not a waste of time.
You know how not this exact question, but it reminds me, I've had things that I've done that haven't worked out, or, like iterations of myself as a person that that past past life or whatever. And I remember lamenting over it at one point, thinking, what a waste of my time to have that period in my life. Yes, it was not a waste at all. That is a skill. Those are skills. Those are experiences that you put in this bank, and they're a savings. They were not wasted. It's in this bank, and it's held there, and you can pick and you can pull some of it out when you need to. Not wasted, not at all.
Do you notice any trending bad writing habits when it comes to designers or people whose main vessel of communication is images?
That's a really good question. Do I notice any bad writing habits? So I do a little bit of editing when I work with people. For me, ambition is a double-edged sword for me. Being passionate, committed, and ambitious is great. Ambition has another side. It's like overreaching. Okay. And it's a boundary that I think designers and people have to make for themselves. When am I pushing a boundary? When am I pushing up against something, an edge that's needed and that's wanted, that's desired? I'm on the edge of something. And when am I overreaching? So at times I find the language of designers, I will tell you, and they're not going to disagree with me, more so architects, very overreaching about the capacity of the work. Not the capacity, sorry, the reach of the work, the effect, the power, the influence of the work. I think when you're, and I get this way with when I write too, I think writing can change the world. When you really love something, when you're really passionate about it, you think it can create waves and things like that. You have to see where you're overreaching. And you're saying more because you want more. But you have to look at the reality. And I don't want to diminish anyone's ambition either. Okay. I don't know. That kind of answered the question.
Now, would you maybe equate that to using hyperbole in words to describe their designs or their imagery, that since they may not have all the library of terminology, they use maybe something that is a bit more hyperbolic and push beyond?
Yes, and at times I have seen words that are made up, like words that people make up because it is a part of something they believe is intrinsic to an invention. And so it has to be, the language itself also has to be an innovation. And I think that that's a mistake. I think your language can become an innovation once you hit a certain place. But if you're starting something new and you're on the edge of something, be relatable. If you compare your product with something that is relatable, you actually have an edge. Versus if you're trying to push your product to something that's going beyond, you're putting your product here. If you're elevating the language. Oh, I have a really good example of this. There's a couple really great restaurants that are doing experiences. Okay, Vespertine, it's one of them. And there's restaurants that are into experiential, eating. If you look at the language, there's other restaurants, who are emulating some of this. If you look at the language, it sounds amazing. You go to the restaurant and, oh, this was good. Completely underwhelming. If the language had not given me a certain expectation, I would have enjoyed it a whole lot more.
I think that's something we need to remember when we are not as routinely versed in written language.
Yeah.
Where as creatives we practice our visual skills, our translating other people's words into visuals, but then going back, making sure that your delivery, again, doesn't oversell and underdeliver.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. I think that will wrap our evening. Thank you so much